the Southend Werewolf. In this one, they find a man who's possessed by a werewolf demon, and they get him an exorcism to cure his issues. This case is a really weird one, and it often isn't discussed very much, very likely due to the fact that many wonder if it's legitimate or a cleverly crafted hoax. The claim that this man had a werewolf demon possessing him has also led a lot to speculate about the psychological factors at play, which we're going to get into as well. I did a ton of research, and I have a theory of my own to explain what really happened in this case. Despite the widespread skepticism, there are still those who believe that something paranormal did happen. As we delve deeper into the case, it's essential to separate fact from fiction, and that means examining all the evidence that we have, no matter how minuscule. The Warrens have always been polarizing figures in the world of paranormal investigations, with a reputation for pushing boundaries of what's considered acceptable. Their methods have been criticized by many as being sensationalized and unscientific, yet they remain one of the most iconic and influential couples in the world of paranormal investigations. However, as I talk about many of the Warren series that I've done so far, their level of influence also raises questions about the blurred lines between entertainment and reality, and whether the Warrens' work has contributed to a culture of sensationalism and misinformation. As we can see, the quality of quote-unquote ghost hunters that are churning out in today's society, it's really dumbed down now to just a Hollywood version, and no one's really doing any investigations anymore. Alright, so as always in these type of videos, I'll be presenting the story first, which may include embellishments. I usually try to pull the most commonly repeated story across all the publications. After the storytelling, we'll delve into the possible explanations for the event, and we'll analyze the Warrens' role in this case. For those who are new to the channel, make sure you check out the whole Warren series we have been working through. The Southend Werewolf. Bill Ramsey was born in 1943 in the town of Southend in the United Kingdom. Bill's childhood was very normal until one day in 1952 when he was 9 years old. He was playing outside his home and he felt a cold chill enter his body. His skin froze and he was overwhelmed with a horrible stench that almost made him sick. In that moment, thoughts of running away to live with the wolves invaded his head. He hadn't had thoughts like this before, so it was quite strange. Suddenly, he heard his mother calling out to him to come inside, and this snapped him out of his thoughts of running, but for some reason it induced a moment of pure rage. He was so angry, he grabbed a fence post and pulled it out of the ground. He began to swing it at his parents and began chewing on the metal fencing that came with the post. His parents were so frightened that they just ran inside to hide from him. After a few moments, Bill's senses eventually came back to him. He calmed down and he felt a piercing pain, for the metal that he was chewing on had cut his mouth up horribly. He was completely confused by what had happened. His parents came back out once they saw him calm down, and no one in the family ever spoke of it again. He actually repressed that memory until much later in life when it came back to him. Bill would carry on with his life without any further incidents. That is until in his early 20s when he got married. In 1967, he began having nightmares. In this nightmare, he would have a feeling of dread, like something bad was in the room with him or something was really wrong. A common recurrence in these nightmares also included him following steps behind his wife as she was running away, screaming in terror from him. Other versions of the nightmare, he'd be face to face with her in the kitchen and she would look at him with pure terror. He began to realize in these dreams that he didn't look like himself. Something was wrong. One night, he woke up in fear from another one of his nightmares, and he thought that he heard the sounds of something panting somewhere in the bedroom. It turns out that it was Bill himself. These dreams would carry on for the first 18 months of his marriage, and then things would just calm down and stop. But a few months after that, one night the family was watching TV while eating dinner. They were showing a classic movie, The Wolfman.
Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
Abby, Bill's wife, made a comment about how much Bill loved the movie, and Bill went into a rage and shouted at her. And he said, "Maybe I'm sick of the Wolfman." Bill immediately left the house to calm down. Both he and Abby were quite confused by the situation. They normally didn't get into arguments like that, for no reason especially. As Bill was walking down the street, suddenly the memory of what happened when he was 9 years old came flooding to him.
Possession started was when I was 9 years old. Suddenly the temperature just dropped completely like midwinter. freezing cold. And there was a terrible stink coming in the air, like a sewer backed up or something. Then I just literally flew off the handle as though I was mad somebody. Just went into total rage. The fence post was 2 or 3 inches square. It was set into concrete in the ground. I pulled it out and smashed it on the floor till it broke.
Things within the household would then calm down again and go without incident for about 15 years. That is, until one strange night in 1983. Bill was out with friends at the pub when he began to feel the icy cold sensation and the nausea again. That usually is what would happen and accompany him anytime he was about to have an attack. He went to the bathroom to collect himself, and there in the mirror, for a moment, he saw his reflection, and it was a wolf staring back at him. He came out of the bathroom, and his friends recognized that he didn't seem like himself, and they decided to get him home to rest. They all got into the car together, and everything was fine, but Bill just suddenly, a rage overcame him, and he went and attacked his friend that was sitting beside him. He started clawing at him, and he bit at him, and he just went crazy. They ended up stopping the car, and all 3 men were trying to hold him down and calm him down. Eventually he snapped out of it, but he was so ashamed or upset with what he did to his friend that he actually got out of the car and ran off. But his friends, even though he attacked them, they recognized that this wasn't normal, so they went chasing after him into the forest and found him because they didn't want to just leave him. They got him home, safe and sound, and he was calm, and that was it. Everything calmed down yet again. But it was a few months later, around Christmas in the same year, 1983. Bill happened to be working cab. Normally he was a carpenter, so I think in the winter he was doing off work. He was driving his cab when suddenly he started having chest pains, and he thought that he was actually having a heart attack, so he went to the hospital. He got inside, and they were taking a look at him, and halfway through, the nurse was looking him over. He grabbed her arm and bit his teeth into it. Witnesses of the event apparently say that Bill was hunched over, both his hands were curled up, like he was his fingers were like claws or something, and he was baring his teeth and growling. It was said in this incident, multiple people tried to subdue him, and he attacked them all, and he was flinging people across hallways and rooms as if they weighed nothing. A police officer was finally able to cuff him, and the hospital ended up tranquilizing him. The next morning, the doctor came in to see him, and he came clean. He told the doctor what was going on with this wolf thing. Obviously, something's wrong. They wanted to check him into a psychiatric hospital called Runwell Hospital, but it was all voluntary in this situation. They couldn't force him to go, and Bill didn't want to check himself into a psychiatric facility. This was the 80s, remember? So, there was a bit of a stigma attached to them, plus a lot of these hospitals really weren't on the up and up yet. Not that all of them have been resolved in this world, but anyway, that's a different topic. Now, when Bill retells this story, the timelines end up not matching up, but there are actual police that confirm this hospital stuff. So I'll just play you a clip of Bill explaining what happened in this first event, but the way that he tells it, he actually didn't end up in the hospital until the second event, which we'll get into.
Till one day in December 1983, I suddenly started to get some severe chest pains. I was concerned it might have been my heart. So I brought myself here to the hospital and sort of hoped they'd check them out. Well, while I was in the process of running some tests, taking my pulse, blood pressure, I let out a growl and started to snarl at the nurses and even bit one of them. And so they had to sedate me, and they called the police, who then rushed me off to Runwell Hospital.
2 months later, it was around the end of January, Bill left a visit that he was having with his mom when he began to feel another attack coming on, so he went back to the hospital. The staff knew of him now and were pretty fearful. There was a nurse that was alone in a room with him, and she was a little bit nervous, so she went out to go get the doctor, and when she went to move, Bill suddenly had a big outburst again. He attacked an orderly, he started attacking a bunch of other people, and apparently it took 4 officers to hold him down and subdue him. One officer was hurt so badly he stayed in the hospital for 4 days after the attack. Bill regained his faculties again as he was walked out to the squad car. At the local police station, there's a jail inside the police station, a police surgeon came in to see him. I don't think we've had these in Canada. I don't know if they have them in the States, but apparently there's doctors on staff to look at them in the police stations, so I don't really know how it all works, but apparently there was a police surgeon. So the police surgeon supposedly ran tests on him there at the jail and found no medical issues as to what was causing these attacks. But again, he was advised that he should be checking himself into the psych facility. Bill refused yet again and went home. So, sorry to correct myself, there's 2 incidents, and now there's a third one where he actually gets checked into the psych institute. And you'll see, and we'll get into this, Different versions of this timeline are told in different spots. So this is why we're going to be a little bit all over the place with this case. So after this incident, everything was calm again, and he was fine until 4 years later in 1987. The book describes this differently than he describes it later. So in the book, it talks about he was sitting in the pub and he got an idea to pick up a prostitute or something. Like they're kind of like alluding to the fact that he's like planning something while he was in the pub. But when he tells other people the story later, he was driving home and then he picked up a prostitute, not to hire her, but because she looked too young. So this whole incident is a little fishy. A lot of people have different theories about this one. But essentially, okay, Bill's in the pub having a drink. He decides to go home. I don't know if he came up with a plan while he was in the pub. It's very confusing. Regardless, he gets into his vehicle and he starts driving. He sees on the road, and she's about 19, and apparently her statement says that she saw this van and it was kind of driving, like following her a bit weirdly, and the guy wasn't like talking to her or anything. So she didn't actually offer herself, like she didn't signal that, hey, you can hire me. She instead turned around and started walking away, just like, I don't want to deal with this person, I'm getting weird vibes. And even though she did that, he still kept following her slowly. And then eventually, like, he pulled up to her and was trying to get her attention. She stopped for a minute and she's like, okay, I guess I have to talk to this guy. So she's talking to him. And she says that he was really calm. He looked older and like, just talked quietly. So it kind of calmed her for a minute. Then she decided to get into the vehicle with him. Even though she was getting a bad feeling, she went against her feelings. Then when she got into the vehicle, he stopped talking. And it got really weird feeling, like the situation just felt really off. Bill says that when she got into the vehicle, then he started feeling that cold sensation and the like nausea and everything, like he felt an attack coming on. So she's like, okay, you can just let me out here or something along those lines. But he's like, no, I'm going to take you, I'm doing a citizen's arrest and I'm going to take you to the police station. The whole thing's a little weird. He does go to the police station. But she's so freaked out, like, as soon as he stops the car, she jumps out and she runs into the police station because she just wants to get away from this man. She's, like, totally not sure what he's going to do. Bill just stayed in the vehicle. An officer came out to talk to him to figure out what was going on. Bill got out of the vehicle, and the officer touched Bill's arm, and then Bill just went insane and attacked this guy. And he ended up on top of him, and he was strangling him. The guy almost died. He thought that he was done for. A dozen police officers came out and subdued Bill. And then, that officer, it was Terry Fisher, the officer that he attacked. Yeah. That officer was so traumatized by this event that he actually retired afterwards.
When I heard the call for assistance, I came out and I saw Sergeant Fisher actually on the ground with his back close to the wall with Bill Ramsey sitting on his chest with his hands around his throat. I called for further assistance and it took about 5 or 6 officers to restrain Ramsey and to get him under control. Ramsey was actually placed in the cell and he was no trouble for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. Then he started to make banging noises. Officers came to see what the problem was. It was then discovered that Ramsey had actually got his head plus his arm and shoulder through this aperture and was striking out at the officers. Well, in actual fact, he'd done, his hands were formed in the shape of a claw, and every time somebody came anywhere near the cell door, he would make a lunge at them. And at this time, he was also curling his lips and growling. Bill Ramsey's conduct at this time was so violent that the police surgeon was called, and he administered an injection. Bill Ramsey continued thrashing out with his arm through the aperture of the door, and it took another injection given by the doctor before he was in fact subdued. The fire brigade, having been called also, then soaked him with soft soap, and it took 4 firemen and 2 policemen, quite considerable effort, to get him out, his head and his shoulders, through this hole.
Okay, so the book, even Lorraine and Ed's website says it took 12 officers, but then this clip, the officer saying 6 officers. So pointing these out, these little things, because in this case, there's a lot of little mistakes like that. And normally a 1 or 2 off isn't too big of a deal, but there's a lot in this case, which is a little questionable. But let's carry on. This is when he was finally forcefully sent to Runwell Hospital. And he was put up there for 28 days. and like a court order or whatever, but he ended up only staying for 10.
On one occasion, I was detained here for 28 days to see if they could run tests and try and get to the bottom of some mental condition I might have, but nothing seemed to tally with my symptoms in any way, so one suggested it was probably alcoholism, but that didn't tally with previous attacks either, because I'd had attacks when I hadn't been anywhere near alcohol of any kind, so I think they finished up just as baffled and confused as I was, and we really got no further.
So I just noticed that in playing this, even though I watched this like 5 times, he said on this instance, they tested me for 10 days. So like maybe he did go there more than once. Then in the stories that they tell, it's only once, but it sounds like he did go there more than once. So like I said, for the next 10 days, he had a barrage of tests. He had MRIs, x-rays, psychiatric tests, all of that. And they could not determine what was wrong with him. He didn't show signs like epilepsy or anything like that. But again, with all these attacks, he just gets better and he can be fine. He can be fine for years without showing another one. So after 10 days, they're like, well, there's nothing wrong with him. He doesn't really need to be here. So they sent him home again. After that whole thing happened, because he almost took the life of that officer, right? So after that, anytime Bill would feel the icy cold feeling, he ended up going to the police station and they would lock him up until it passed. They had like a deal going just so he could protect people from him.
So once I got to recognise the symptoms of an attack, I thought the best thing was to take myself down to the police station and get them to lock me up for a couple of hours, and at least that way the satisfaction of knowing I wasn't going to harm any member of the public.
Ramsey said he got to a point where he can actually sense a change coming on, so he can drive himself to the police station and the bobbies would lock him up. In here, he says, is where others would be safe.
But the English tabloids found Ramsey and hounded him to reveal his real-life folklore of a man-wolf.
So at this point, he began making headlines in the press. He was asked to be part of a short film of his story, a film that made its airing in America, where the Warrens got a hold of his story. The Warrens get involved. All right, just a quick note. The Warrens, this is another point of confusion, of just odd timelines and facts. The Warrens say that they were already in the UK and they heard of him, then sought him out. But many other instances say that they saw his story on TV in America and then called around to find him. Then there's another version of the story, and they tell this on their public access show. They saw him on TV in America, then they drive to California to get a hold of the tape and the contact information for the production company. Then Lorraine watches the tape over and over a bunch obsessively. Then they decide that they're going to fly over to the UK, and then they start visiting police stations in the middle of the night. I don't know. This is the story she tells people. And they end up finding the phone number. Even though they went to a bunch of police stations, she ended up finding the phone number for the police station where he was living, and then she talked to them, and then she ended up visiting them the next day or something like that, and then she ended up meeting Bill. But in other stories that he tells, it sounds like he never met the Warrens until he came to the United States to see them. Like he was just talking to them on the phone. The story is a little all over the place on this one. I suspect that it was just all over the phone and he didn't get to meet them until he got to the States. That's what I think probably happened. But we've got Lorraine saying her version, and then we've got the book says a different version, so, I don't know. Also, one thing that is clear across everything is that Ed didn't want to take this case. He thought a werewolf would make them look too crazy, like people. It would just ruin their credibility, and Lorraine pressured him into it. But then on the public access show, Ed, of course, sounds like it was his idea that this was a demon and that they should help this guy. Like he kind of takes credit for Lorraine's idea and insistence. So it's a little bit, yeah. So regardless, eventually they do get in touch with the Ramseys. So after a bit of talking back and forth, the Warrens eventually negotiated with Bill and finally convinced him to come to their church in Connecticut to undergo an exorcism with their, pocket priest, Bishop Robert McKenna. He's the priest that they have all the time in all their cases, the one that's technically not supposed to be part of the church, but he kind of runs his own church. I want to do a deep dive on this guy. It has been hard to find information. I'm working on it. Bill really didn't think much of it. He tells people that he was never religious at all, that they didn't pray, they didn't go to church, they didn't believe in God or whatever. Like, he tells people that in his story, but I question that at the end. We'll get to that. But Bill thought at least it would just be a fun trip to America, because when is he ever going to get a chance to visit America again? But he tells Lorraine, like, he can't afford it. So Lorraine's like, oh, okay, no worries. What we'll do is we'll sell your story, and that will help fund the trip. So they tell the story as if a tabloid newspaper called The People. They tell it like the People funded the excursion for the exorcism, but he actually sold his story to the tabloid for $20,000. And hold on, I did the math. All right, so $20,000 from 1989, would be worth $74,000 in today's money. He was ready to go see them, but for whatever reason, like, they have made delays, and he talks about them making delays. They don't talk about it on their end, but he had to wait a few months before he could go and get this exorcism done. During these few months, again, the Warrens and Bill, I don't think that they met. Like, if you listen to some of the interviews that Bill makes, it sounds like they didn't meet until he got to the States, so I don't know. But eventually, Bill and his wife make it to Connecticut. A few days before the exorcism, while they were in the hotel room, Ramsey woke to find himself on top of his wife with his hands around her neck. She ended up snapping him out of his, like, trance, or, his attack. She was always able to get him to snap out of it. She was, like, the only one able to get him to stop. So even though she was in trouble, she still stayed calm, did the voice, and, like, got him to snap out of it. This tend to actually help a lot with, breaking these attacks. And this is the thing that he was most worried about, is hurting his wife, right? But thankfully, the exorcism was due to happen shortly, as, he desperately wanted this thing to stop. The exorcism. We don't have the exact date, but it's around July 1989. They're in Connecticut, and they're getting ready for the exorcism. They come to Bishop McKenna's church, and Bill sits down in the chair. And Bill's like, he wasn't impressed with all of anything. He started hearing the Latin going, and he just thought this whole thing was just silly. Like, he didn't feel anything happening. Nothing was happening. He's like, I'll just sit here. At the very least, it's a trip. Free trip. So for about 30 minutes, Bishop McKenna was speaking in his tongues and everything, and nothing was really happening. But then suddenly, things started happening all at once. Bill blacked out. Lorraine says it started around his neck, like his muscles on his neck, and then his, like, hands did the claw thing. Then he started growling with his lip turned up and everything like that. His face contorted and everything. Then McKenna commanded the demon to leave his body, like, devil, leave my body. And apparently it just worked. Bill woke up from his blackout, and he said that he felt completely different. He just felt like a big weight was lifted off of him, and he thought, oh, I think this actually did something. And after that, he seemed to be completely cured.
The morning of the exorcism, I was petrified. We drove off to the church, and I was taken and sat in a chair at the front, and I was faced by Bishop McKenna, who started the ceremony with very solemn prayer in Latin. And I just sat there, and suddenly I began to shake, and I thought, God, something's happening. He's bringing on an attack. Something's going on here. And I had an attack, and apparently he commanded the devil to leave, and I came around with feeling that some kind of evil had gone from me. That was 8 months ago now, and thank God nothing's happened since. I have to believe something went on in that little whitewash chapel in Connecticut that is going to leave me in peace now and let me live just a normal life again.
But let's just touch on a couple things of what happened after this whole event. The after effects. The media sensationalism became, like, a bit of an issue. It kind of caused, like, a bandwagon effect, right? After this happened, there were apparently some people claimed to see sightings of the werewolf and different things of that nature. There was just, it came down to hoaxes, or people saw animals and blamed it on Bill. Like, it just kind of, between people's fear and people trying to get attention or whatever. So if you're looking into that case, you may see things like this, like somebody saw an actual wolf. No, it happened, like, after all the press and everything, and it all died down eventually. Bill Ramsey, his last public appearance was 1992, and that's sort of when everything just kind of died off. However, there is another YouTube channel that I found. He actually talks about an interview that Bill did in 2004, so I think there may have been another interview in 2004. Just to kind of talk about the after effects, Bill was fine after. Nothing ever happened again. There were no relapses. Everything was fine. and he didn't have to go to the police station to be locked up, nothing. So it cured him. And that is sort of the totality of the story for the most part. Of course, I'm not going to like read the whole book to you guys because it'll take forever. If you want to go read the book, you can. So what we're going to talk about now is I'm going to go into a little bit of the skeptical analysis of the case and issues in the case that I've seen, issues that other people point out. Then I'm going to give you what I think happened. And after doing a bunch of research, what my opinion is happened. And again, you can take in all this information and you can decide for yourself what really happened. I'm not going to force you to choose my side or anything. It's fine. Then at the end here, we're going to do a Warren analysis because this is part of the Warren series. So I always like to end these videos with a little analysis of the Warren's role in this case. So let's begin with a little skeptical analysis. So various skeptics and investigators have analyzed the claims and found inconsistencies or lack of evidence further supporting the idea that this is a hoax, right? There's a few different issues with this case. I'm going to organize it into two areas. First, lack of physical evidence. So as always, the Warrens like to say that they have a ton of evidence, but no one has really seen this evidence other than some pictures.
And document, I'm talking about police officials, I'm speaking of Bobbies, I'm speaking of everyone that we dealt with in order to document this case. But after all the documentation that we had, and it all on video as well as records, when I asked Bishop McKenna, Bishop, I said, would you like to borrow the tape and would you like to borrow all of the material so that you can see the documentation? He said to me, no, because then I might be frightened. He said, I would rather do it and
I don't know
help
if we
that
can get a
man.
shot of this. Maybe we can go to camera one and see if we can get it. It might be a little glary. If we can get a picture there.
Oh, there.
I just want to include that clip because Warrens have a habit. Any of you have been watching this series, you've noticed, some of you point out in the comments too. They have a habit of saying that they always have evidence, but they never provide it to anybody. Yeah, there's photos, 100%, and they've provided them. They're in the book. They're all over the internet. So apparently there's supposed to be audio tapes. Can't find them anywhere. No one's heard them. And in this clip on their public access thing, she says that they have video. And again, nobody's seen the video. The only thing that can be confirmed is the police statements. And she does start the whole spiel off by saying that. And that is actually, yes, police witness statements are the only thing that can be confirmed. Now, the other issue with the lack of physical evidence, during the exorcism, Lorraine tells the story over and over again to different news outlets, but she says that she saw him turning into a wolf when McKenna was exorcising the demon or whatever out of his body. And that's a pretty bold claim to make. And they were taking pictures the whole time during the exorcism. Not one of the pictures, he looks like a wolf. And apparently they have a video camera. They didn't video it. They definitely have audio recorders. There's no audio either provided to anyone. Regardless, audio doesn't really prove that he was turning into a wolf. There's no pictures of this, but Lorraine likes to tell everyone this.
It started from behind him, and the muscles in the back of the neck, that began to enlarge, and the ears began to point, and he howled.
Okay, so you saw Lorraine mention about his ears, and I believe that he probably howled, and I do believe that the muscles in the neck were probably like, oh, what's the word? I can't think of it. Seizing up. But she said that she saw his ears like turning. That wasn't in any of the pictures. So you're going to make a bold statement like that, you're going to sound a little kooky. So regardless, through all this, the only real clear photographs is him like holding his hands like he's a wolf and maybe growling at people, but that doesn't mean you're a wolf. It just means he thinks he's a wolf, but you're not seeing him as a wolf, right? And any audio recordings, even if they do pop up at some point, it's just going to be him growling and howling, and most humans, we can fake it. And the thing is, if any of you watched my The Haunting in Connecticut Snedeker video, Lorraine tells people that they had a flood in their basement. I think it was in the news or something. But that's what she says, like, as she got older, she couldn't provide copies of any evidence of anything because they lost it all in the flood. That ended up being the excuse as well when people pressured her more for the evidence, because I guess back in the day, I mean, people just believed them. But then people started questioning them, you know, as time went on. And then they suddenly lost all their evidence in this flood. So we're never going to listen to these audio recordings or see this apparent video either. So, and this goes into, like, she said that she had this evidence and she, you know, was able to provide it. But a lot of Bill's interviews too, he talks about he had to wait months to see them. So, like, how would they have that evidence if they weren't there staying with them and collecting the evidence? The whole thing's a little little fishy. I don't know. This whole story is a little fishy. Also, McKenna doing an exorcism without evidence. Again, they show video of him in the interviews in a church. I don't know how he has a church. Like, I don't know the rules of all this, but doesn't like the Catholic diocese or whatever need to approve exorcisms, and it requires evidence? He was just a rogue exorcist out in the wild. So, as well, because we're going to get into witnesses next, but we'll end this off with, he apparently attacked people at the hospital multiple times, but people have looked, like, there's no police reports of this. And like, if he's physically hurt people at the hospital, nurses, things like that, he would go to jail, like, for assault. And I just don't believe that every person that he apparently attacked in the hospital, because the way they retell the stories is like he was attacking dozens of people. One officer was in the hospital for 4 days and he didn't go to jail for that. They said that he didn't end up being sent to the hospital. He only got sent to the psych ward, ordered by a judge after the attack on that one officer, and that one officer attack is the only one that officers have corroborated. All these other attacks in the hospital, all these other physical assaults, no records, no police records. He didn't go to jail. He didn't get held anywhere. None of that. So I just personally, I'm not buying it that these other attacks happened. Maybe he freaked out on somebody, but I don't think he physically hurt anybody. And that's the thing. This whole story seemed to have been like over exaggerated and elaborated. And that brings us to the witnesses, and let's talk about them. Witnesses. So like I said, there's proof of the attack on the officer. There's statements towards that, but there's not proof of these other attacks. And in fact, the tabloids didn't really run any stories about him until the attack on Terry Fisher, the officer, Terry Fisher. One of the officers actually wrote in his report that Bill was snarling like a wolf, and he thinks that may have aided to the over-exaggeration of this being a werewolf thing. So he thinks in his description on the report is what got the tabloids started.
He snarled and he growled. It was an impression of his lips turning up and showing his teeth. And I can recollect actually saying at the time in the reports that I filed that he took on the appearance of a mad dog.
So some skeptics believe that there wasn't other attacks. I mean, maybe he freaked out, but he didn't physically hurt anyone. But there were no police reports for the press to get a hold of and go with. And it wasn't until this police report suddenly, where that officer describes him as acting like a wolf, now suddenly it's a werewolf attack. As well, other skeptics have pointed out, Bill talks about his family being harassed by the press and that it was like horrible, their lives were ruined. But that being said, there's very limited articles on this story. Like, there's only a few out there. If you're really being hounded by the press that badly, I feel like there would have been more articles in the paper. So there seems to be like over-exaggeration. And the YouTube channel that I mentioned before, which I'm going to show you some clips from him, the YouTube channel is called The Tape Library, and he actually says in his video that he knows people who grew up in Southend and they never heard of Bill. So it seems like this story was over-exaggerated as to how popular it was. That being said, 1987, there was 266,000 people living there, which is pretty big. Like, it's not a small town that is like a small city, and it's big enough that like a small story or a medium story could, not everyone hear about it. But if he was truly being hounded by the press, I feel like the whole city would have heard about this story.
Despite the claims that the family were hounded by the press, shockingly, very little additional information is available on this case. I know people who lived in the area at the time, and none of them have any memory of this story at all. However, the story was featured in an episode of Sightings in 1992, and later in the early 2000s on a British show called Jane Goldman Investigates. Both were able to not only include interviews with Bill, but also with a couple of the police officers involved in one of the attacks. While I was unable to find the original Sun article that the tabloid ran on the front page, I was able to find a later rewrite of the story from them online. All of these additional sources paint a very similar picture to each other, leaving the Warrens' book maybe expectedly as the outlier.
Go check out his channel. He does deep dives like I do too, and he does a bunch of research as well. Very good. Okay, so also with the witnesses. So really, the only witnesses are the police. I did a bunch of digging. I tried to figure out what are the name of the nurses, what are the name of the doctors. Give me the names of anybody. And the only names that come up for witnesses, like actual names, are the police officers. But the police officers did hear Bill say, "I have the devil inside me," when he attacked Terry Fisher. Even though Bill says that he wasn't religious at all and never believed in gods or demons until he met the Warrens. So, with these witnesses, really, there are none, which brings doubt. As well, talking about witness testimony, Bill admits that he blacked out for all of these attacks. He doesn't remember them. The stories he tells are the stories that he was told of things that he did. So we can't even really necessarily rely on his account either.
Although it is worth noting that in what I believe is the final interview Ramsey gave in 2004, he says that he barely remembers any of the events, and is simply repeating what others told him he did.
I never used to remember anything during the attacks. I just sort of blacked out. And the worst nightmare of it all was waking up and thinking, oh God, what have I done this time?
But the tape library, his conclusion is he believes either the other attacks didn't happen or things were over-exaggerated. And honestly, I have to agree with him on that one. I do think that this whole thing over-exaggerated or things did not happen. Because why wouldn't they arrest this man? Why would they keep letting him go? The Warrens often rely on questionable sources, and they're known to embellish the facts and use their own brand of expertise to spin a yarn for their books. It's not hard to see yet again why the Warrens got involved here. Were they genuinely trying to uncover the truth? Or was it just their next big payday? As you dig into this more, it becomes clear that the Southend Werewolf incident is just probably another cleverly crafted hoax designed to grab attention and sell books. That being said, was there something going on with Bill? Yes, I do think there actually was something going on with him. And let me give you my theory on what I think was going on. Theoretical answers. This case is a little bit different from the other ones that we've done, and we're going to start delving into cases that really don't have a lot of information out there. And the only real deep dive information that we have is Warren's own book. I don't really take their books seriously. We all know that they're over exaggerated and, fluffed up to sell a good horror story. So this case, I was having trouble finding anything that wasn't repetitions of the same stories, the same holes. I wanted to try to find some sort of gotcha moment or something. And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to do something different this time. And I don't normally use ChatGPT and AI for stuff like this. Yeah, I mess around with AI for pictures. I think most of us have, but I never really sat down and did it for research. So what was funny is because I thought, well, if I can't find the information, maybe AI can dig it up. And then I just was watching again over and over interviews and stuff. And I thought, you know what? He actually mentions physical symptoms in his interviews. And I have anxiety and panic attacks. And the first thing that they get you to learn to control them is recognizing the physical symptom. And he always talked about feeling nauseous, this icy cold perspiration, cold sweats hit him. And I thought that sounds really familiar. It's a panic attack kind of situation. So I just sat down. It's funny. I sat down with ChatGPT and I started asking them questions about what if someone had these symptoms? What if someone had these symptoms? And it was actually a very effective conversation with a computer. So I feel silly for saying this, but I just thought that I would give you guys a little bit of context as to how I got to this point. Yes, I did go and Google everything after, check, actual medical publications to make sure ChatGPT was giving me correct information. That being said, I went down a few different paths and I have a lot of notes all over the place on this, so I'm going to try my best to organize this. The main gist of it is some type of mental illness. So let's get into it. Psychological analysis. Pre-warning, this next section I get a little bit nerdy, and if you don't really find psychology fascinating, feel free to skip it. All right, first, let me start off by saying I'm obviously not a psychologist. I just have a lot of information in my head about psych-related things. A lot of stuff runs in my family. I have my own things that I've been through as well. I was planning to become a psych, and then I was going to do criminology. So I'm just able to understand medical texts, journals, diagnostic criteria, medications, things like that. I just have a base knowledge that I developed through college courses that I was taking. So I understand this stuff pretty well, but I'm not a psych and I'm not diagnosing any. Okay, so this information is a little bit all over the place because I think when it comes to Bill, I don't think it was one mental disorder. I think what was wrong was a combination of a few mental disorders that exacerbated one another. I'm going to discuss a little bit about some options and ideas of what I think might have been going on. First off, I believe that all of the initial stuff came from stressors in his life. His father was a sergeant major and he held a really high position, and apparently he was very tough. So at 9 years old, his household may have not been the best household. There may have been stressors that he's not telling us about. We don't know, but like he does say, his father was a sergeant major and a very tough man. So who knows what that could mean, right? So that could have caused the first attack at 9 years old. His next attack that he gets is right after being married. Being married is stressful. Like a wedding is stressful, and then you start a marriage and you're going to have kids and start your life. So like that's a stressor. And it stopped about 18 months in once he got comfortable with being married. The next attack happened when he was working taxi, which he is actually a carpenter, which means he was out of work of his normal specialty and making less money. And this happened during December around Christmas. There's probably stressors happening then that caused it. Then the next attack after that, it was right after Christmas, still working taxi, probably still short on money, and he had the attack right after visiting his parents. So again, that could be a stressor. I think that these are the stressors in his life, and I think that his mind is just a little susceptible to some things, and he couldn't handle stress properly, couldn't process that he was stressed. So instead, he kind of developed, you could call lycanthropy, but I think lycanthropy might be actually a combination of different mental disorders. So lycanthropy, it is a real thing. It was first recorded in 1852. This was just close to the Victorian spiritualist craze and movement. So they were kind of also being affected by media and literature back then, calling it lycanthropy. There is a clinical diagnosis for this. It's not saying that someone's a werewolf. It's saying that their mind has convinced their body that they are, and their body is actually reacting with things like inhuman strength and distorted way that they hold themselves and things of that nature. When they have these abilities like inhuman strength, it's only temporary, and you can get inhuman strength, and it's actually, the clinical term is hysterical strength, and it's extreme physical strength by humans beyond what should be our capacity. And it's usually when we are perceived in life or death situations, which if he has anxiety and panic attacks and things like that, his fight, flight, or freeze effect is coming in, which he actually shows symptoms of, and that could be actually causing his mind to think he's in a life or death situation. And that's what got me thinking, what if lycanthropy is just a combination of this stuff together? The hysterical strength with anxiety triggering the mind thinking it's life or death. On top of, I believe, body dysmorphia is also mixed in with this. And body dysmorphia is relatively new to the mental health diagnostic criteria and understanding. It only came out in the DSM-3. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's essentially a handbook, a how-to book on diagnosing criteria for mental disorders, how to treat it, additional disorders that you want to look at. It's like a handbook for psychologists and psychiatrists. So body dysmorphia was in the DSM-3R version, that actually it was added in the one that was released in 1987. Bill was in the mental institute around that time. So the thing is, whenever new stuff comes out, it takes time for doctors to get on board with it. Sometimes you have doctors that are sort of old and set in their ways, and they don't want to learn new things. It happens even in psych, and it takes them a long time before they pick up new stuff from the DSM. He was in an NHS healthcare system, which is free healthcare, and I'm in it in Canada. It can take us 20 years before the free healthcare system recognizes something that's new. So it was very new, and people still didn't really understand body dysmorphia. I think we understand it nowadays, but that's very new, this understanding. It didn't exist when I was younger. I remember people were very confused by it. So the body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD, or body dysmorphia, it's a mental health condition where a person spends a lot of time worrying about flaws in their appearance. They also often don't feel like themselves in their skin, like they aren't in the correct body. And it can range with different symptoms. Someone could think that they need to be a wolf. Someone could think that they shouldn't have a right arm. It's a psychological thing. So there's different things that people think could be wrong with their body. It's not just a black and white statement of what someone finds wrong with their body, but it can become like an obsessive thought in their head, and they can become depressed over it the fact that their body doesn't match what they think it should be. And it can be a very debilitating disorder. The reason why I think that he has this, also with a combination of something else, I mentioned this one first, is that he kept seeing himself as a wolf. He kept wanting to be a wolf and run away. When he looked in the mirror, he saw himself as a wolf. But as well, when he was admitted to the mental institute, there's actually quotes of him saying that all the other patients and doctors and people around him looked like uncanny. Like it didn't look like he was like around humans, but they weren't wolves. They were just like weird looking people. And he saw himself uncanny too, which makes me think there's something psychological going on there. But there's also something else that it could have been, if not body dysmorphia. There's mirrored self-misidentification. It's delusion characterized by the inability to recognize one's own reflected image. I feel like he was sort of in this range here, like he wasn't really recognizing himself. He didn't feel like himself. He kept thinking about how he wants to be a wolf. And there's like a combination of things going on here. And I think that this was sort of his mind's way, I guess, of coping with whatever stressors he seemed to be facing. Those are some psychological symptoms, but he did have some physical symptoms, which is what headed me down this path here. And the physical symptoms are very similar to what you experience during fight, flight, or freeze, which you can get from anxiety disorders. But anxiety disorder, all it really is, it's a disorder where your brain thinks you're in life or death situations when you're not really, but your brain thinks you are, so your body starts acting like it. So that would make sense for hysterical strength to kick in because his mind thinks he's in a life or death situation. As well, the symptoms of this fight or flight, also it relates back to basal vagus syncope, which essentially you can faint. It hits your vagus nerve. Inside your body, these can all be related things. But here's some symptoms of when the syncope happens. A person will have pale skin, lightheadedness, tunnel vision, nausea, feeling warm or feeling cold with a clammy sweat, blurred vision as well. So he was experiencing cold with a clammy sweat and nausea, and he did blacked out, but his body was still doing stuff. And there's disorders that allow for that. So what other people would see in someone who's experiencing vasovagus syncope, jerky abnormal movements, a slow, weak pulse, dilated pupils. The person would look under stress, anxiety, or emotional upset. Some type of strong emotions would be kicking in as well, because that can actually trigger vasovagal syncope. He was also experiencing psychosis. Not that he was psychotic, he was just having a psychosis, like episodes, because of these combination of things that were going on inside his brain to make him think that he was in this life or death situation. Because when you have psychosis, you have an altered and distorted perception of reality, and it can also cause hallucinations as well as false beliefs. And that could explain some of the things that were going on with him, thinking he's a werewolf or a wolf. Because when you're going through a psychosis situation too, you can have something called psychogenic blackouts. And that is the body's involuntary reaction to stress, and it causes a sort of blackout. Some people believe that he was epileptic, and because Bill would call these events seizures. Like they test for epilepsy, but he didn't come back as confirmed with it. But you can have what looks like seizures, but they're actually psychogenic blackout seizures, and it's just a psychosis moment. It can look like a seizure, it can act like a seizure, but it's not epileptic in any sense. All of this stuff is your mind tricking your body into thinking that something's happening that's not actually happening. So any tests that they run are going to come back negative because this is all his mind that's doing this to him. So just to summarize, I think we're looking at anxiety with the fight, flight, or freeze, body dysmorphia, or some kind of self-misidentification, possibly depression mixed in there, because it often is mixed in these situations, and psychosis. However, this would be brief psychosis because he's only getting psychotic attacks every once in a while with huge breaks in between. So I think all of this gets triggered by a stressor in his life. Parents, money, marriage, etc. And that triggers this culmination of all of these disorders together. I think all of these disorders actually make up lycanthropy itself. The treatment or cure? So even back when he was in a mental institute, and even now, these would be treated with SSRIs, because the SSRIs will help with compulsive thoughts and behaviors, because he has the compulsive thought of wanting to be a wolf. As well, will help with like any depression, things of that nature. Sometimes it helps with anxieties too. But what's most important is therapy, especially CBT therapy. So he probably would have never went to therapy because it was very stigmatized back in the 80s, and especially for, I know it's like sexist to say, but a man going to therapy was like frowned upon. So he would have never explored that. So I'm basing all of my thoughts on this on the fact that he's cured by an exorcism. The only way that you'd be able to cure some of these mental illnesses with an exorcism is it would be like a placebo effect. So he can't have epilepsy because you can't cure epilepsy with your mind. It can't be schizophrenia. Schizophrenia runs in my family. I'm very familiar with it. You can't just like with sheer will get over schizophrenia. It needs to be monitored or medicated. It's not something that you can just do CBT therapy and get better. There's actually like things going on in the brain that can't be controlled properly. If it was a combination of like anxiety, depression, dysmorphia, mirrored self misidentification, delusions, psychotic episodes, because he wasn't psychotic all the time. He would have episodes with huge breaks in between, which means like these are situational, right? They're caused by a stressor. So all that he'd have to do is put in the work in therapy to get over it. Or if his faith is strong enough, an exorcism, he would probably assume that it would cure him. And as long as he believes, then he can believe in faith. All throughout like his interviews and everything too, he talks about not being religious and his family's not religious. But I don't know. I don't think that's really true. I think that might just be part of selling the story, because even when he attacked that officer and caused like a lot of this to end up in the papers and everything, he was screaming at the devils inside him. Like he was already saying that he was possessed before he even met the Warrens. So obviously there was some sort of faith there to begin with. And obviously he was religious, and they were downplaying it for whatever reason. I think it was just to sell the book better, right? To say, oh, you know, I wasn't a religious person, but the church saved me, so the church is all great. And that would be on brand for the Warrens, you know? Thing is, like, people don't realize an exorcism's not just someone saying prayers over you. It's a very weird environment that they're in, and a lot of people talk about it's a stressful event. It's very much like a big ceremony, kind of feels like it could even be spell work, you know? So like there's this energy around it, there's just this creepiness about it, and they'll keep going and going like as long as it takes. Like you could be in there for hours. It can be physically stressful and it can be mentally stressful. It's a stressful event that could reset someone's thinking, you know, if they really believed in it and gave into it. It's very thematic and has like a big showmanship to it, as long as there's a priest that, you know, plays it up really well, which McKenna was pretty good at that. So I could see a susceptible mind falling for this, and this is his cure, which this is fine. Like he lived the rest of his life out. I don't know if he's still alive, but you know, we didn't hear of any other attacks or events that happened. So this obviously worked for him. So great, you know, whatever works, right? In the end, faith is what took care of him. And you could have faith in mental health therapy and CBT, or you could have faith in the church, or you could have faith in something else. And if that helps you get through the stressors in your life and helps you get through your issues, then that helps. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people that don't go to therapy, but they go and see their priest at church. And their priest is a therapist. Like they're trained to do this stuff, and they are providing therapy to their parish, right? So it's just a different outfit on the outside, but it's the same actions on the inside. Now that's the happier option of what I think happened. The other one, because I have another theory of what I think it might have also been, and that is substance abuse. He drank a lot. Like a lot of the stories he tells was, I was in the pub drinking for a couple hours. He drank a lot, even though he tried to downplay it. Yes, he had an attack when he was 9, but that could have been the initial coping stressor. Maybe his father drank a lot. Maybe something happened that he doesn't talk about, that he repressed, and that's why he had the attack. Who knows what? Maybe his parents were fighting. We don't know, right? He could have depression, anxiety, and everything, and then be self-medicating with alcohol. Substance abuse can be linked to psychotic disturbances. Plus also people under the influence. I've seen people under the influence who have that superhuman strength, the hysterical strength. Now, he wasn't always drunk at every attack. He talks about feeling nauseous and getting cold sweats and things, and he talks about a seizure. If someone's a really bad alcoholic, they can have seizures when they don't have a drink. And maybe he was in that position. So maybe some of this was actually him not having his drink yet for the day or whatever, and he was going through withdrawal, not realizing that he was going through withdrawal. This is the 80s. People didn't know as much as we do nowadays. He could have been experiencing withdrawal events that could have caused a psychosis. Someone in my family was actually coming off of alcohol and opiates, and we had them hospitalized, and they were hallucinating like crazy. And we're like, what's wrong? Did he sneak in some substances? And the nurses said, no, that's normal. When someone's coming off this stuff, they will hallucinate as well. Also, just want to give you a bit of a list of liquor withdrawal. It can include dehydration, blood pressure changes, which blood pressure changes can cause the syncope, autonomic issues, seizures, hand muscle cramps and spasms, and focal seizures too. So this also fits for his particular issues that he's having. And maybe the exorcism didn't cure him, because when he went over to America, it was a few days that they were in a hotel before they did the exorcism. And let's say that he's a social drinker, and so he's there with his wife, so he doesn't have his friends. So now he's gone 3 days without drinking, attacks his wife in the middle of the night in his sleep. He could be coming off this stuff, right? He could be going through a withdrawal. And then when he finally gets into the exorcism, he's on day 4 or 5, and it's about a week to get this alcohol out of your system. So leaving the exorcism and, his mind playing into it, on top of the alcohol just kind of actually leaving his body finally, because he was probably on a plane for a day. We're probably at 5 days or something, and that would be about the time that he would start feeling better. The first 3 days are the toughest. If you're that bad of an alcoholic that you're having seizures. Normally you would need medical intervention for that, but there are people that are kind of right on the line. There's a fine line. Don't do it. See a doctor. Point is, this also could fit for someone who's an alcoholic and his attacks were a combination of either being too drunk or withdrawing, and him not understanding that he was withdrawing. So those are my theories around mental health. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. I think that it all ties into that. Now we're at the end of the video, and we're going to end off talking about the Warrens. We're going to analyze the Warrens' role in this case, and just, this is another case in their career. So let's take a look at them in more depth. Warren analysis. Alright, so just in general, I already explained some of the holes in the story. It's a little bit all over the place, things of how they first got in contact with them, whether they even met in person or not. The interviews are a little bit off all over the place, so I'm not too sure what the correct answer is there for that, but I feel like something is off in the timeline there, because things are not really matching up. With all that being said, the Warrens always make money off these stories. So they sold the story for $20,000 to be able to fund their trip to America for the exorcism.
A British newspaper paid Bill Ramsey $20,000 for the rights to his story. His private ordeal was now a public spectacle to be played out in rural Connecticut. It was here that the Warrens introduced him to Bishop Richard McKenna.
So when Lorraine tells the story about this money, I'll play the clip in a minute, but they kind of always play down the money, right? But $20,000, and they try to report this as a news outlet funded their trip for him to be able to get better. But no, he fully sold his story off, right? So he got $20,000 for that. We know that much. That is confirmed. $20,000 would have been $74,000 in today's money. And we're talking British pounds, by the way. So £1 is $1.30 in the United States. Okay, so we're talking $104,000 US dollars is how much they sold their story for. They went to America for a week. So I did the numbers on that. Flight, accommodations, food, transportation, and today's money for a week to go from England over to Connecticut, and today would be between $3,200 and $5,200, so it'd be today's money. So they have $104,000. You spend about $5,000, maybe you buy some trinkets and stuff while you're there. Let's say you spend $10,000 on a week trip. you still have like $90,000. The family got that money from that tabloid. We know they got the money. I don't know if Warren's got any of that money, but maybe. We don't know. That's a huge amount of money to say you're a werewolf, have some newspaper articles, go to like an exorcism and just fake it. Like, the other option is that he just faked the whole thing, right? Maybe got really drunk one night, attacked that police officer, and maybe that's the only thing that actually happened. So not to be like mean, but maybe he picked up that girl, noticed how young she really was, and was like, oh, this doesn't look good. I'm gonna go do a citizen's arrest. I'll say it's citizen's arrest, go drop her off at the police station, right? And that's when things got like a little bit weird and stuff. And then he attacked that police officer because he was really wasted too. Who knows? But that's the only attack that we know for sure happened. But he's still coming out of that with $90,000. And he didn't go to jail or anything. They sent him to like a psych ward for it for a little bit. And maybe he's a little bit embarrassed by the story. Who knows? It doesn't sound like he was. Like, he does sound honest to God, like he just wants to carry on his life. But for like, I don't know, a couple years of embarrassment for $90,000 extra in the bank, I think a lot of people would just do it. You know what I mean? If he really didn't want to be in the spotlight too, why did he agree to do the first movie that got the Warrens' attention? Like, if he really didn't like this newspaper stuff, I don't know. I feel like he plays a good game of pretending like he just wants to be like left alone, but he kind of put himself out there too.
You can't imagine the horror of looking on the front of the national press and seeing you've been called a werewolf.
So that's the money that he made, that Bill and his family made. But the Warrens, why the Warrens get involved? Well, they make their money too, because they also sold a story. The book. The Warrens, they ended up writing a book from this story, and it was called Werewolf, A True Story of Demonic Possession. So on the book, it says that the authors are Ed Warren, Lorraine Warren, Robert David Chase, and William Ramsey. So William Ramsey's name is on it, so he would have gotten a bit of a payout from the book too, unless they gave him that $20,000 that might have been part of selling his story. We don't know the contract that they signed with them. It turns out Robert David Chase is actually a pen name for a different author named Ed Gorman. He actually produced a bunch of other detective novels and things under different names too. When he worked with the Warrens on the book, it was early in his career when he was still young, and he was just kind of doing like a work for hire kind of thing. This is common with the Warrens. Again, we see yet another case where they kind of hire like a lesser known writer so they can sort of take advantage of them. This is very typical. He ends up writing another book for them too called Ghost Hunters as well. So he got a bit of like a career takeoff by working with the Warrens, obviously. Now, they wrote this book. They made this money off this book. Yet Lorraine says this.
I had tried very hard to find funding. See, I wanted nothing to do with any money connected with this. And so I needed to find funding in order to bring Bill Ramsey to this country to be exorcised. Otherwise, Ed and I would have had to live over in England for a period of time, and time just wasn't on our side.
And in the same episode where she says that, they're also selling their book.
Okay, and this is the book Werewolf that could be purchased still to this day, correct?
Yes, it can.
This is by Ed Lorraine Warren, of course, with Bill Ramsey and Robert David Chase.
So you guys can see the hypocrisy in the statements, right? They made their money. They made their bank off it. The thing to remember too, a lot of people, I think, forget, maybe some people are too young to realize, books made a bunch of money back then. You could make bank off of books because there wasn't like huge, productions with movies and stuff. It was just kind of, things were really out of budget. We're kind of at this in-between point where books were super popular still. Not everyone had cable. Not everyone had the money for it. There wasn't a ton of TV stations, TV shows, tons of movies, so books were very popular and very lucrative. And the Warrens made a huge chunk of their money off of selling books. Now, considering that he said that he sold his story for $20K, I honestly don't think. There's no proof of what he got out of this book. I don't think he got anything from this book. I think he sold his story. Lorraine brokered the deal for the paper to post that thing, got him the $20K, and they just pocket the rest, right? And it's a very typical Warren move right there. All right, so Warren's pretty simple analysis on this. So this is one of their older cases. At this point, they did do some other cases before this that they lost out on some money on. So they were probably starting to really dial in what their contract looked like. And they made their money. All right. They go and do this stuff because they make money. They pretend like, oh, it's a silly story and they wouldn't be taken seriously about werewolves. They knew what they were doing. They planned to write a book. They were going to make money off of it. Like, they saw the story and thought, great, we can write a book about this. It's very clear. They make their money off selling people stories. So she can pretend, they all pretend like they didn't have any money. They pretended like they didn't spend any money. They pretended like, oh, we don't charge people money. And they live a very like simple life and they weren't extravagant with their funds. And that's why people believe that they didn't make money. So this case, what fueled them? Just money, honestly.
I told Lorraine, I said, Lorraine, I'm not going to go before the public and start talking about a werewolf. I said, it's going to be interesting to go there, see what we can do to help this man, but that's about it.
He felt that was just stretching our credibility just a little too far to believe in werewolves. But I believe.
Lorraine just feels so uncanny here, so I wanted to throw it in the video. In this particular interview, like, this is the most animated I've seen her with the smiling and stuff of any of her cases. It's a little bit weird. So as you further explore this case of the Southend Werewolf, it becomes clear that the debate surrounding its legitimacy is far from over. Well, really, I think it's over, but you know, there's true believers. They just believe everything that the Warrens wrote in their fictional books. So the debate will rage on. One thing is for sure, though, the implications of this case go far beyond the world of paranormal investigations and really into the heart of human psychology and a combination of our fascination with the unbelievable and also just the unknown about the human mind. And with that, we will leave the Southend Werewolf case here. Now, in the comments below, let me know what you think. What do you think about this case? What do you think might be the reason behind it? And just, you know, any other thoughts that you might have. Also, is there anything else in this case that you feel like I missed or overlooked or anything? Go ahead, throw that in the comments below. Good conversation, back and forth, anything constructive, I 100% appreciate throwing down there. Also, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. Liking really helps with the algorithm, which helps grow out the channel even more. As well, if you are enjoying the Warrens stories and you haven't caught it yet, I have a whole Warren series. I will link the playlist and everything as well at the end of this video. Also, I'd like to thank our members and Patreon supporters. I appreciate you all. All the support really does help, and you know, hopefully we can get even bigger come the new year. We're almost at the end of the year here, and then I can work on doing some other shows and more stories for you guys. Now keep an eye out for the next video, the next deep dive video. I think is going to be on the Satanic Panic. And this all actually relates back into the psychic movement and the Warrens and all the other stuff. So that should be an interesting video for sure. Thank you guys for stopping in on this video. I appreciate you. Have a good rest of your week.